It's Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and you know what time that is? It's time for the 2 p.m. project, live from Interchange headquarters, and here's your host, Chris Kabadi. Hey! 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 So that's what happens when you're in the office all by yourself. Not much goes on. We're in a crazy time, people, but thank you for joining us here on the 2 p.m. project. It's great to have your company here today. We're coming to you live from Interchange headquarters. I got to rev up the crowd. Come on, everyone, give me a big round of applause. Hey! The warm-up guy left just before we started, so it's going to be a little quiet in here, but you get the idea. I think everyone's at home. Everyone's in the Get Smart bubble, and that's just what we're doing for now. So let's hope we can have an hour of fun together. Let's meet some interesting people and have an interesting conversation. So my name is Chris Kabadi. I'm Creative Director at Interchange. And in each one of these episodes, we're going to be coming to you every week on a Friday afternoon. We're going to explore topics that support you in terms of the skills, the resources, and the mindset required to really thrive and be productive during this particularly challenging time. So welcome for the next 60 minutes to the 2 p.m. project. Oh, budget cuts, times are very, very tough. So I should remind you, this is actually an interactive show, so please submit any questions. The Q&A should be up and running if you want to type your questions to any of our presenters who are here for the next 60 minutes. Ask any questions that you like. It is totally interactive. We want to involve you in our community as much as possible. And we'll have time for some of these questions towards the end of the show. Today on the show, we're going to focus on well-being. That seems like a big topic, doesn't it? It's not going to be the big topic. We're going to look at a very particular part of it. Very, very particular part of it. Because we know that the skills of well-being can be taught. I don't know whether you knew that. That's the first thing you've learned today. The skills of well-being can be taught. To explore this topic, we're going to explore a model called PERMA. PERMA. It's not what you get. It's not the Italian hairstyle. You got to the PERMA. It's not PERMA. It's PERMA. It stands for P-E-R-M-A-H. Today, we're going to look at this one, the P. See, what a seasoned facilitator I am. I have different coloured pens. P. The P stands for positive emotion, and that's what we're going to look at today. For the next 60 minutes, we're going to go through positive emotion connected to the PERMA model. We'll deal with the others at another time, so stay tuned. Thankfully, I have three brilliant experts with me today. I'll just do the comedy. It's quite exhausting, the comedy. We have three brilliant experts. Melissa Giles, to you first. Dr. Melissa Giles, our consulting director. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show. Melissa, come in. Are you there? Pronto? Pronto?
Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hello. Great to have you here. We're going to get to you in a second. How's everything at your house? Is it okay?
Yes, it's very good.
I haven't seen you for a couple of weeks, so I'm looking forward to the conversation with you. Guest 2 is our Managing Director and Founder of Interchange, Gabrielle Harris. Come in, Copenhagen. Gabrielle, are you there? No, you have to unmute your microphone. See, this is the first challenge of these things. I heard this morning someone say, this is the new welcoming. Yes, I can hear you. Everyone working virtually. Gabe, are you there? Hello, how's everything in your house?
It's chaos.
Okay, good. It's okay.
I've turned on a few episodes of Bluey to get us through the next hour.
Good, fantastic. Thank you. More tips and tricks for everyone here at At the 2 p.m. project, thankfully, we have a brilliant guest speaker here today, Associate Professor Simon Moss, who is coming to us from Charles Darwin University in Darwin. Thank you so much for your time here, Simon. Are you there? Pronto, come in. Hello, Darwin.
How are you, Chris? Apart from looking a bit lonely and pathetic, how's everything else there?
That's okay, Simon. No, that's all right. You will not feel lonely while you've got us here. You're welcome in our community. That's the whole point of today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I can't wait to talk to the three of you as the hour goes by, and then we'll all get together at the end to answer any sort of questions. So Simon, thank you so much for giving up your time. I'm very keen to hear what you have to say. We'll come back to you in a minute. Melissa, let's start with you. So can you tell us about PERMA? PERMA, I shouldn't say it with the Italian accent. It is actually a very valuable model that we're going to talk through today. We're just going to be concentrating on the P. Can you tell us more about PERMA and specifically about positive emotion?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I like the Italian accent. I'm not going to try and copy it, that's for sure. Yeah, so PERMA is an evidence-based model that focuses on well-being. So as you said, it's an acronym standing for positive emotion. The E is for engagement, the R is for relationships, M is meaning, A is accomplishment, and the H is for health. And where this model came from is a lot of research, particularly from Professor Martin Seligman, which many of you might know as one of the founders of positive psychology. So it is an evidence-based model, and we find it's a really good foundation for having these conversations around what makes a difference in terms of well-being and helping people thrive and flourish. So yes, as you
Melissa,
said, Chris,
sorry, can I just stop you there? I think for the people who are tuning in today who may not be aware of the type of work that we actually produce here, when you say evidence-based model, what do you actually mean by that?
Yeah, great question, Chris. So evidence means that someone has done a lot of research. It's actually empirically tested, which means they've done studies on it, they've looked at the difference it makes. So what particularly Martin Seligman found is that if you focus on these 6 core elements, if you really think about how you bring those elements into your life, that will promote well-being, resilience. So, you know, if you think of health on that kind of spectrum of being unwell through to thriving and flourishing, this is really around that positive end of the spectrum.
Okay, fantastic. Sorry, you were talking through the PERMA acronym. So today we're focusing on positive emotion. Why is that important for us? I could almost answer my own question, but why is it important at this time?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a challenging time at the moment. So I think when we talk about positive emotion, it's really the hedonistic route to well-being. It's about feeling good. It's something that we all appreciate in our life. So, you know, we wanted to start off the 2 p.m. project focusing on positive emotion because it really brings to the fore how do we make sure that we bring those feelings into our life. So, you know, how do we find ways on a daily basis, you know, to bring more of that positive emotion, enjoyment, happiness, joy, love, those aspects of positive emotion into our life. And we know that, you know, happy and well people, you know, they reflect on the past with gratitude, they enjoy the present, and they look to the future with hope and optimism.
But that also must be the great challenge at this time. Like, I know just even from watching the news each day, or, you know, I'm at the point now where I'm trying to actually minimize the amount of information that comes to me because I actually feel like it's impacting my emotional levels. And so then battling what I'm seeing, battling the fact that we are not around each other as we have been all day, every day for the past however long. We're now in separate homes and we're talking to each other via video. How do you actually rise above that? How do we actually tackle some of these things to then focus on our own positive emotion to boost it? What are the ways that we could do that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll tell you about my situation at the moment. So we live in a tiny terrace house and 2-bedroom house, and we have 3 adults in that house and 2 children. 2 very spirited boys. They're 3 and 5. Spirited is another word for slightly naughty children. So it's fair to say that it's a pretty intense and chaotic experience. I've just bribed them with a pack of Smarties to leave me alone for an hour so that we could have this conversation. But for me, what I'm doing at the moment is, I guess it's around reframing. So, I'm focusing on the fact that from all of us working from home, my husband and I are both working at home. We've got the 2 boys with us. One of the things I've been focusing on is that we're getting to spend more time together. There's no commute to work. We're in the house all day together. So rather than kind of focusing on, I guess, what could be the frustrations around it, I'm focusing on the fact that I'm actually getting more time with them, which means I get more love and joy. I genuinely like my children. I think they're pretty funny. So some of the positive emotions that we talk about, that joy, love, awe, pride, my eldest is learning to write and to read. So I'm actually having more positive emotions at the moment because I'm spending so much time with 2 of my favourite people. So for me, I think, at the moment I'm focusing on how I reframe the situation to really draw out those positive emotions. I'm also incredibly grateful for my health and the health of my family at the moment.
So would that be your advice to the people who are tuning into this episode, like who are dealing with this? I mean, I think a lot of us, despite the fact that we've always promoted this to businesses for flexible working, we're now flexible working with no choice. Everyone's doing it, and a lot of businesses are actually not prepared for it. They don't have anything in place to tackle some of the emotional and behavioural side of what's going on. We're not just trying to work from home. We're trying to keep our relationships alive. We're trying to keep our relationship with our children alive. I mean, the greatest challenge, I imagine, is stopping in moments where you are frustrated because you're on the phone and your little kid comes up to you and tackles you or screams in your ear, as Gabe told me the other day, and stay positive, to try and reframe that. You seem to have the ability to do that, to look at things through a different lens. How hard is it for the rest of us out there who don't have the ability to do that?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to remember when we talk about positive emotion is that we're not talking about being positive all the time. So experiencing negative emotions is a natural part of life. So this isn't about applying kind of that crazy smiley face where you're positive all the time and you're just thinking positively. We are all going to experience negative emotions, and I think part of PERMA and part of the research around positive emotions is appreciating that negative emotions have a place in our life. We're just more likely to get those without trying, those negative emotions, especially at the moment, So what we need to do is thinking about counterbalancing that with bringing in those positive emotions. So, going and getting a hug, or watching a funny video, doing something that brings you joy and happiness, whatever that might be. And for everyone, it's different. I get a lot of joy from a cup of tea. So I'm drinking more tea than I've ever drunk in my life at the moment. But for me, that brings me a lot of joy. Going into the kitchen, making a cup of tea, listening to the kettle boil, it's a bit meditative for me. So I think it's just looking for those opportunities, Chris, in your life, knowing that the negative emotions are a natural part of your existence. You've just got to think about how you counterbalance that with some of those positive emotions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Melissa Giles. Wonderful to talk to you. We'll come back to you in a minute, Gabe. I might even bring you in Gabrielle Harris, who's Managing Director and founder of Interchange. 3 boys of her own. Melissa has 2 boys, I should say. Gabe's got 3 young fellas at home. So many men in your life, Gabe. This is going to be fascinating to hear your thoughts on this. How much positive emotion do we really need in our lives at this time? Go.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I think firstly, let me try and answer that by talking about an academic called Barbara Fredrickson. So Barbara has dedicated most of her career to actually studying positive emotion. And I really love the research that she has done, because it actually looks to, well, first of all, she calls her study, or the model that sits around her study, is called Broaden and Build. And fundamentally, what it tells us is that neurologically, we're quite in tune with our negative emotion. We can recall that really rapidly. But if we look and we rely on our negative emotion, it actually narrows our view of the world. I guess to put it simply, we can look at things through a small prism or through a larger one. And as I was walking out here, I just said to one of the boys, can you pass me something that's, that's small and one of your toys that grows. And so they handed me this to say, well, you know, this does. And I thought that that was quite quite a fun way of thinking about emotions. We can look at it through a very narrow prism, or we can broaden it out, as Barbara says, and look at it more broadly. And ultimately, she brings it down to, in a really simplistic way, talking about a ratio of 3 to 1. We need to have 3 positive emotions to every 1 negative emotion to really thrive, to sustain our well-being. And I think at times like this, it's important to consider just that really basic skill, because it's probably the easiest one to let go.
Okay, so she's talking about 3 positive conversations, 3 positive interactions to 1 negative. I imagine it's probably a survival technique. I imagine it's what's enabled us to survive as human beings. So we are guaranteed to find the negative emotions out there, and the challenge for us is no doubt to be looking for the positives. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We need to actively think about how can we look for, actively go and find those positives. So I'll share my morning with you, which some of you have already wonderfully had the pleasure of hearing. But I'm now in a situation where I'm working from home for the safety of my colleagues and the broader community. And that's not a natural thing for my family. I travel an awful lot for work. So typically I'm probably away 3 nights a week on any standard week. And now I find that we have 5 people all on top of each other. So my request this morning was, can we please clean out one of the rooms in our house so that I can put a desk in there and I actually have somewhere to work from, rather than having children screaming in my ear at any given moment. So the agreement in our household was that the boys this morning were going to go and tidy up their room so that I could move furniture around and put a desk in there. They called out to me and said, we're going out to play on the street now, but the room's all tidy for you to go and use. And I walked in there and it honestly looked like a bomb had hit it. There was stuff all over the floor. There was no surface area that could possibly be used. I was furious. I was so angry at them. But really at the heart of it, I was just experiencing so much negative emotion with all of the things that are going on in all of our lives right now, that that negative emotion was intensified. And I had to take myself out of that situation to actually bring myself back to what are the things that I can tap into to give me that positivity again, to rebalance me. And I thought about things like how lucky we are that we're all still healthy, how fortunate we are to have a house, to be able to, you know, move things around and allow us to be able to continue on with our working lives. And the fact that we still have food that we can eat is a real positive. So I took it back to gratitude, and it was the one thing that just recentered me to allow me to go, what is it that I can do? What's within my power to influence a more positive environment for myself and my family and my colleagues?
Okay, for the viewers out there, it sounds like the Harris household has a lot of toilet paper, pasta and rice. So if you need anything, you know where to go. Gabe, can I also suggest, all of these conversations are fantastic, talking about the individual. There's a whole different game out there for leaders of businesses. So you're talking about positivity within yourself. The game changes as a leader of a business, as a CEO, as a business owner, managing teams through this really challenging period. How do you actually consider ways, or what sort of strategies could you put in place to build positive emotions for the team?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think it's really important to give that consideration, and sometimes it's not valued as highly as what it needs to be. Look, I know for our team, we're a very social group of people. That's how we probably found ourselves doing this within 10 days of lockdown, but it's more for us than for anybody else. But it's really important that we stay connected and we have common ground and commonality. And so at the end of last week, we were trying to think of what is that thing that can continue to bind us. And so the choice that I made was, I'm going to go and get everybody a dartboard and a pack of beers, and at least we can all log on together and spend some nice social time that we would have had otherwise in a different scenario. So bringing that sense of routine and normality in, I think is beautiful, but finding more so what's the sense of fun that you can have, what's the positivity that you can bring, albeit when people are operating remotely. But I'm seeing that all over the show at the moment. I've got my most gorgeous little neighbour hanging over the fence watching our live broadcast. There are remarkable examples at the moment of leaders taking on some wonderful initiatives, like we've seen the Prime Minister of both Norway and also New Zealand running press conferences for kids and just breaking things down into normal everyday language to help everybody understand what's going on and how you can essentially look at things in a positive way. One of those little examples was, if it's somebody's birthday in your class, everybody jump onto a video conference and sing them happy birthday. It's not much, but it's just those little things that as a leader make things better for people.
Fantastic, Abe. Thank you. We're going to come back to you in a minute, but I'm going to move on to Simon in a second. So I just wonder, how do we bring more positive emotion into our lives? So we obviously know from research that people who volunteer or care for others experience more positive emotions. We know that connecting with nature is a really good way of boosting positive emotions. But I wonder whether you knew that even looking at a photo of nature can almost do the same thing as walking through a beautiful bushwalk, which is pretty good considering that many of us are bound by four walls at the moment. So even looking at photos or videos, cat videos, how about give us a shout out for a cat video? How brilliant, if you just spend a bit of time doing that. I just wanted to highlight also one brilliant way of doing this, a classic example of where a government body has actually shown such innovation in a time like this. The Victorian zoos have put animal enclosures online. So 24/7 you can log in day or night and see the zoo. I don't know if we've got the ability to cross over. I think we're looking at the giraffe enclosure, but you can log into the Melbourne Zoo at any time and watch these funny guys just walking around. They have snow leopards, they have penguins, you can go to Werribee Zoo, to Healesville. It's a brilliant example of how a business can be really innovative during this time and stay connected to the people who love them and who want to be there, who can't be there. It's just a matter of thinking outside the box. So it's twofold here, I would say. Firstly, think outside the box as a business. What's a way that you can actually stay connected? And part of the new challenge can help boost your positive emotion. The other side of it is maybe hook in and have a look at some of these animals now and then. It'll help boost your positive emotion. I'm going to move over now to Associate Professor Simon Moss, who thankfully has given up his time. Simon's in Darwin at the moment. What's the temperature in Darwin at the moment, Simon? Is it still crazy hot there even at this time of year, or where are you at?
It's 32 degrees because it's 32 degrees every other day of the year.
Oh, okay, right. Good, thank you. Wonderful. Okay, good to know. Everyone's locked in. Simon, can you start? Just what are your thoughts on the tools and techniques that maybe we can actually consider at this time and help people utilise to bring more positive emotion into their lives? Do you have a thought on what Melissa and Gabe might have been, alluding to? Do you have your own ideas?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, it's fascinating because during this period, people are obviously trying lots of strategies and techniques to improve their happiness and mental health, like from mindfulness meditation or gratitude diaries or whatever. Unfortunately, most of the techniques that tend to be very effective in most times are not as effective during very tumultuous times. And the main issue is that many people are introducing temporary changes to their life, changes that might last just a few months. And the problem is that whenever we introduce temporary changes to our life, we tend to feel a bit dissociated from the future, as if the future is like another land altogether. And when we feel dissociated from the future, that is when we feel like what we're doing now is not as relevant to our goals in the future, that's when our resilience and motivation plummets. So at the very time we sort of need our resilience and motivation, it tends to diminish when we're introducing these sort of temporary changes. And the reason is we're just not as willing to sacrifice our pleasure now for the future. So we become even more sensitive to problems that arise, which they inevitably will, and our resilience drops. So somehow we just need to introduce changes in our life now. They're actually likely to endure in the future, well after the virus ends.
But what you're asking, I suppose, is for us to consider our own behaviour, and I suppose the first step is awareness. Like, how are we even aware? For those of us who don't tackle these moments all that often, this feels like a once in a lifetime experience. I think Melissa and I were talking about this morning. With our children, this will go down as a defining time for them. Their lives will invariably change because of the experience that they're going through, however long it takes. How do we take that step to having the first stage of awareness to make that change?
Well, and probably similar to what Gabe and Melissa was saying, this is probably the time now, one of the introduced changes that you want to introduce that will last. It's a time to start to gradually develop a repertoire of skills and practices that can improve your emotions and resilience in the future. This is the time. So, for example, what people should be doing every morning for about, say, 30 minutes if they possibly can, is to undertake 3 very different tasks that demand a lot of effort and concentration. 3 unnatural tasks. Tasks like brushing your teeth with your wrong hand or speaking faster than usual, although I'll give you some better examples in a moment. But actually that very simple task of 3 very weird, unnatural tasks every morning has lots of benefits. The first, as Gabe mentioned, is it creates a sense of routine if you're doing it every morning. And routine's particularly important now, when there's so much sort of flux and unpredictability in life. We need some sort of sign, unconscious sign, that everything's in order. And that's what a routine tends to do. But more importantly, when you engage in 3 unnatural tasks every morning, it tends to sort of rewire what's called the mesolimbic pathway, which basically maintains your effort and attention across the day. So if you do 3 hard tasks every morning, you can sort of maintain effort and motivation across the day better. And that becomes very important now when we have to withstand lots of challenges and difficulties in our life. So I'll give you one example. So yeah. One really good example is that every morning, what people should be doing is collecting sort of a whole lot of articles or books that they might want to read for the future, right, that could be helpful for the future. And then for about 10 minutes each morning, reading that book or article as absolutely rapidly as possible. Because actually, even just reading very rapidly, deliberately reading very rapidly, also increases dopamine in the brain, the reward center, essentially, makes you feel better, but also because it's quite an unnatural task, improves your capacity to maintain effort too. And so tasks like that can be very helpful. So sort of gaining a repertoire or developing a repertoire of tasks that could be useful both now and in the future is particularly helpful.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thanks, Simon. Is this what Melissa and Gabe were talking about around the models and looking at positive emotion, PERMA and Fredrickson? Is that something that you have explored greatly in the work that you've been doing? Do you have experience? Do you have sort of practical experience of rolling that out with people that you've worked with?
Yes, and one of the complexities, as was touched on, is that as important as positive emotions are, you shouldn't be striving for them in the sense of trying to suppress negative emotions. So, I mean, one of the issues is that sometimes people are almost scared to experience, anxiety and distress and so forth. And that's certainly not the way of trying to experience positive emotions. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite. Some of our work suggests, consistent with what was being said, the most effective emotions are actually ambivalent. They're a combination of both the positive emotions, excitement, and negative emotions. So, for example, deliberately, maybe again every morning, doing something that you've been avoiding, something that's a bit of a challenge, something you don't really like doing, but you feel like you should, actually create both the negative emotions, because you don't want to do it, but also a sense of pride and excitement when you do. And those emotions are particularly helpful. They've been shown to sort of greatly increase resilience over time.
Fascinating. Okay. I don't know. I hope the people watching this are going to tackle some of this. I think for me, it's watching some films that I hate. It's like when you were talking about that, I'm thinking, what would it be? Now, I know the cinemas are closed, but essentially for me, the great challenge would be to buy a ticket to a film I know I'm going to hate. How about that? Give that a crack. Or it would be to go to a restaurant to the food that I know I'm going to really dislike and actively pay for it. How's that going to go? Yeah, I don't know how people are going to go with that, but I think it's a great challenge to do. That's
true. And it's not necessarily things you're doing just for the sake of not liking it. It's things that you've been avoiding that you should do. It might be being assertive in a situation you're not. It might be public speaking. It might be even just more exercise, but just those sorts of activities that you're normally a little bit uncomfortable with is really now the time to embrace them for a moment, not for too long. I mean, of course, we need to be nice to ourselves too. We can't push ourselves too hard. We need to be compassionate to ourselves during these very difficult times, give ourselves a break. But just for those sort of 10, 20 minutes or whatever it might be, even half an hour a day, pushing ourselves into those actions that we've been avoiding is very helpful.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, thank you. Simon Moss, who's coming to us from Charles Darwin University, Associate Professor in Darwin. Simon, we're going to come back to you in a minute. We're going to get everyone together. Just a reminder to the people who are watching this stream that it is interactive, so there is a Q&A going. If you want to give us any questions, we can come back to them in a minute. We will have a special guest at the end of today's episode who's going to play a beautiful piece of music for us as well. We like to mix it up here. You're watching the 2 p.m. project on Interchange TV. Let's just call it that. We haven't even considered that, but let's just call it that. We're coming live from Interchange in Fitzroy. And now, through the magic of television, I'm going to change rooms. Ooh.
Even that made even me laugh. Oh dear. So silly. The things you do on a low budget. Welcome to the boardroom here at Interchange. Let's give the boardroom a big round of applause. Okay, that's not working. Okay, now is the role play part of things. Wait up. It seems that my glass is half empty. No, sir. I believe your glass is half full. Oh, no. I think if you look at it, my glass is half empty. This lovely glass of rosé has only been poured halfway from the bottom up. No, sir. I think if you look at it, it's actually your friend, but it's actually half full. It's just that you look at it through a different lens. Well, I'm looking at it through this lens, the lens of rosé, and it looks half empty to me. Give the waiter a big round of applause. Thanks, Gary. Okay, so people who see the glass half full are certainly happier people than the pessimists of the world. I think we can probably all suggest. But those of us who are thinking on Friday afternoon, how soon can I just pour this down my neck? Anyway, I've got to think about something else. Learning to think positively is obviously very worthwhile. However, changing the way that you think can be quite difficult. So what if there was a way that positively affected how you feel? There are plenty of exercises that you can do to help yourself feel happier, avoiding anxiety. Maybe you can hear me a little bit better if I do that. Increasing your willpower, deepening relationships, boosting confidence. Here's an interesting story. There's a guy, William James, who was a Victorian philosopher who was working at Harvard University. William James proposed a radical new way of thinking about the link between thinking and behaviour. Now, we already know, obviously, that thoughts and feelings cause you to behave in different ways. So if I feel happy, it's likely that I'm going to smile. Or if I feel angry, it's likely that I'm going to make an angry face and point and talk about my children and be angry, and I shouldn't bring my children into it, but you know what I mean. James thought, well, I wonder if we can actually flip it so that if we think about it, the way that you behave can actually influence the way that you feel. So we do it the other way around. So if theoretically I force my face into a smile, then does that actually make me feel happy? I make an angry face. Do I actually feel angry as a result? James loved this theory so much, he actually called it bottled lightning. That's how much he loved it. From my understanding, he was one of the few that loved it because it was pretty much frowned upon by his academic mates, and it was kind of put in a bottom drawer for some time. It wasn't until much later in the 60s, psychologist James Laird, who was working at the University of Rochester, he stumbled across the theory and decided that he might give it a crack. So he got a whole bunch of volunteers to take part in a study. He called it the electrical activity of facial muscles because he couldn't quite tell the people that they were coming to do this test. What he did, and I will use this brilliantly, he put electrodes, using this with blue tack, electrodes on the eyebrows of the volunteers who came. And then he also put electrodes on the edges of their mouths like this. It's not chewing gum, it's blue tack. And he got them to put their eyebrows together as if making a frown face. And then he got them to see if he could move the electrodes wider like that to see if it make a smile face. And then he talked to them about how they felt. Did they feel better? Why is that going into my eye? I take that off. Did they actually feel better when those electrodes went that way or that way? And they were all kind of going, well, I actually feel better when I was doing that, when I was pushing the electrodes that way. And he was like, well, what about when you pushed them that way? And I'm like, well, no, I didn't feel as good. Others decided to test this theory as well at the University of Michigan, similar to when a photographer asks you to say cheese. Cheese, they did E sounds or they did U sounds, as in you, to produce expressions of anger, and they felt similar. They felt happier when they were going E. Germany, researchers in Germany also, I don't know where my pencil's gone, but they were actually investigating how to teach people who were paralysed below the neck, paralysed to write, and they looked at the difference. They put a pencil between volunteers' teeth or between their lips. So the difference between the facial muscles of the E and the U was quite significant. Similar sort of results. Now, whether you believe it or not, the idea behind your behaviour influencing how you feel or your emotion seems to be quite significant. That's just one interesting thing I found during the week. I thought you might find that interesting. We might go back to our experts to have a talk to them about whether they believe it either. The other thing I would suggest in this time particularly is a way to boost your emotions is doing good for others. Hey, how about that? Just do a bit of good for others. Do some community work if you can. Connect with your neighbour virtually or on the phone. One other thing I would say to the viewers out there, please don't take a selfie of yourself doing good for others and post it so others can pat you on the back. Just do good for others, eh? All right, through the magic of television, I'm going to move rooms. I'm going to leave that glass of wine as much as I'm going to move rooms. Okay, see you in a sec. Oh, it's seamless, isn't it? It's like I've been doing this all my life. Let's bring it.
I was hilarious while my mic was muted. What a shame you missed it. Let's bring all the special guests back into the fold. We do have some questions. I'm going to have to go because I think I've taken my glasses. I can see some questions coming up from the people watching. Does anyone have a thought about the smile or the frown while I've been doing that? Do you want to completely diss what I've been doing in the last 5 minutes? Up to you.
Well, in fact, can I butt in? Because I think, I mean, I'm aware of the studies and you're exactly right about them, but they also show something else that's very interesting, which is that actually sometimes these exercises are most effective when we don't realise that they're designed to enhance our emotions. So, for example, as you say with the smiling, if people know they're smiling, deliberately smiling isn't as helpful. But as you say, being incidentally asked to smile in a way that they don't even realise they're smiling tends to be particularly helpful. And this is one of the complications with trying to improve mental health too. When we're deliberately doing something purely to feel better, it's not usually quite as effective because we're very aware that the only reason we're feeling better is because of this particular exercise. Whereas if we're doing something for another purpose and the feeling better is an incidental consequence, then the emotional benefit is much more lasting. So that's why your example about trying to help others is particularly effective. Another one is also trying to acknowledge your faults to someone. If you just sort of naturally say to someone something like, look, I'm not particularly good at this, or I'm working on this, so you're just comfortable conceding the fault, people tend to feel quite liberated and better as a consequence. It's quite useful anyway, because it creates a bit of trust, and you just happen to feel better. But because you're not doing it deliberately to feel better, the emotional benefit of that activity tends to last. A bit like the smoke. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. We could have probably done the experiment, all four of us smiling for 60 seconds and see how we, oh geez, if only I'd thought of that, that would have been brilliant. What great television. So a question from one of our viewers here. Can we please ask the guests, I'll throw this out to any of the three of you. I've typically got a pretty positive outlook, but my partner, who I'm obviously in isolation with, sometimes struggles to share my positivity. Any tips, tricks to subtly start shifting their mindset over the coming weeks and months? Any thoughts on that, experts?
Does anyone else want to have a go? Because I certainly don't. That's a tough one.
Who's going to have a go? Gabe, I think you got your mic muted.
I do, but I'm now back with you. Look, I can only talk about my personal experience of this, but I think in our relationships, it swings and roundabouts. So sometimes one of us is up and the other one's down, and then we swap around, and but absolutely, sometimes we approach that in a way of being annoyed and angry with each other about the way that the other person is down because we're not feeling buoyant ourselves. But when we can actually be mature enough to have those conversations about how we're feeling, it is about trying to think of what is that positive thing that you can do together or for each other that's actually going to bring the other one or both of you back up again. And it's not easy, because sometimes you can just feel fatigued by it and get frustrated by it. But half of the time it's just about like tackling the conversation head on to say, this is how I'm feeling. How are you feeling? What's going on for you? Let's actually really discuss it, and then work out what we together can do to improve the situation. Which you know, ultimately I'm seeing a lot of in our organisation, which I'm so thrilled about. It's not in relation to people's, you know, marital relationships, but with each other in the team. I'm just seeing so much of you know, person A just connecting with person B. How are you going? You know, where are you at today, and what can we do together to improve that for you and for me? And it's really lovely. I think it goes to the point that you were talking about before with just doing things for somebody else, be it in your relationship, be it with your children, be it with your colleagues or your manager even. This is a quite isolating time for people. So acknowledgement first, and then co-creation of solutions second, for what it's worth. Yeah,
fantastic, Abe. Thank you. Simon, I saw you nodding to that. Did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I also want to highlight, consistent with that, is that, I mean, some people feel quite good feeling down. I mean, it's a complicated one. So, for example, if people are feeling a bit doubtful about themselves, they don't like praise, and they don't like really talking about things that are too positive either. So, for example, it may be in this case, the husband doesn't necessarily want to act to feel too good, or at least wants to talk about negative things, wants to talk about problems and that sort of thing. And that might not be a problem necessarily. And sometimes it's actually just the partner's just feeling very uncomfortable with that. But as Gabe said, sometimes just sitting with those issues and not necessarily worrying about them is quite helpful. And instead converting that to, as you say, just new activities together, doing something they've never done before, tends to sort of incidentally evoke positive emotions without having to feel positive, without having to force it so it feels fake and authentic.
Melissa Giles, I have a question for you. This is a curly one, but if anyone's going to answer it, you are. How do I stop feeling negative emotions? How do you stop feeling negative emotions? I mean, that's a huge question for all of us. What do you reckon?
Yeah, well, I think as we were kind of touching on before, part of being human is having positive and negative emotions. So we know from research that we're not very good at suppressing negative emotions, and when we try to, it actually makes them stronger. So some of the original research in psychology was very much around how do we suppress negative emotions, how do we stop ourselves from feeling this, and what we found over time is that just doesn't work. So what's really important with negative emotion is to accept that that is part of our human existence. We are going to have times where we feel sad and angry and frustrated. So it's being more at peace with that, or as I say, working towards accepting that in terms of this is part of my experience. And then, as I say, it's thinking about how do we bring those positive emotions into our life. So I always give the example, you know, not dissimilar to Gabe, you know, where you have those mornings where everything just goes, you know, pretty, not trying to swear, but, you know, things go to shit, you know. So you have those times in your life where nothing goes to plan. I had a morning recently before we were in isolation where my 3-year-old decided to eat his cornflakes one by one, individually, one cornflake by one cornflake. So breakfast turned into an hour process of a 3-year-old slowly eating his cornflakes when we all needed to get out of the house. So I felt pretty angry, I felt pretty frustrated, and I knew that. So I thought, right, I need to pick this 3-year-old up and give him a massive hug, tickle him, have a good laugh, you know, to counterbalance those negative emotions that I was feeling. So I accepted that I felt frustrated. It was frustrating, you know. I felt angry, I felt annoyed. And I thought, okay, I'm okay with those negative emotions. I'm experiencing those. So it's very much being, and as Simon touched on, it's being compassionate to ourselves that we experience those negative emotions. And I think about it as that scale. So then how do I top up, you know, how do I bring some of those positive emotions into my life?
Simon Moss, Associate Professor at Charles Darwin University. I might throw this one back to you. From my understanding, you've recently, in a number of years ago, moved from Melbourne to Darwin. So in a way, sort of a change in terms of isolation in your own self. How do you have any tips on maintaining connection across teams while working from home?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, I mean, it's funny because I've been thinking about the answer before, and so can I answer that one first, and then I'll go back to the socialisation, because I agree very much with Melissa. But one suggestion though would also be, if people are worrying a lot, that can be something you can overcome. And the simplest technique there is just to tell yourself to worry at a particular time of day. Like, for example, worry at 3 o'clock on Sundays. This seems to be incredibly effective. So when you start worrying, think about it, write down a few thoughts, but rather than ruminate too much, say, I'm going to return to this 3 o'clock on a Sunday or whenever it is. And worries tend to dissipate pretty quickly as a consequence for a whole series of reasons. That was actually just a procrastination answer to your question, which is a much more interesting one. And much more relevant to what people are experiencing. It's really interesting. And I mean, and I don't know the answer. I do know that at the moment, we're all suddenly using, we're, for example, on Microsoft Teams, people are using Zoom and Skype and all those sorts of things. And what we're finding, though, is that it's not the same, is it, obviously? It's not as energizing. So, you know, there's that notion that when someone's quite close to you, they sort of energize emotions in a different way. So whereas a whole lot of sort of Teams, even though we work on Teams or other video conferencing software, doesn't create the same sort of energy. And so we really need to take that into account in the way we work together. It does mean that we really have to shorten our meetings. It does mean that we'll have to sometimes communicate information more through other means, whereas actually getting together on, say, a medium like this really should be more about problem solving, you know, working things out together quite differently, which is actually a lot more invigorating. So I think, and I know I haven't answered your question at all, but it does highlight the fact that we really do have to rethink all of our normal management leadership processes, because they're very different in these situations. Although a lot of virtual teams have been operating for a long time, I think most people recognise they're very different to normal teams, as much as we sometimes pretend otherwise. And just one element to that, by the way, is that when people feel further away, which often happens in these situations, we tend to think differently. We're much more focused on sort of big ideas rather than small details. So it means that, for example, in conversations, the conversation should be about great strategies of the future rather than minutiae. We don't really like to discuss minutiae when we're far away.
Huh. Well, I agreed with everything you were talking about until you said, I don't actually have an answer to your question, and then I was suddenly confused. That sounded fantastic. Gabrielle Harris, I think I'm going to throw this one to you as a business owner, managing director and founder at Interchange. This is probably a good one for you to answer. How do you deal with people who don't handle bad news very well? Oh, and how do you unmute your microphone?
Sorry, I'm going to get the hang of this, I promise. Well, I quite like and are very supportive of all of the things that Simon's been talking about in response to that. You know, when people don't handle bad news, it probably is because they feel that that's bad for them. And what's really important is your response to that and how you support them with acknowledging and embracing those feelings. Simon was talking before about worries, and when you're feeling concerned, to write a few things down and then go back to it later. I think sometimes when people are responding to bad news, it's quite easy to want to react or to fix it for that individual, but most of the time it's just that we as humans want to be heard. So allowing yourself to just jot down what those people are sharing with you around what they're feeling, and if need be, if appropriate, to share that back at some point rather than to respond with answers and directions, is probably the best thing to do, because it's I don't think there's any shortage of bad news coming our way in the coming months, and we can take oppositional views to that news, or we can probably come at it with as much empathy as we can muster up and see things from each other's perspectives, because just kindness is really what's going to get us through this period.
Yeah, very true. I think it's interesting too, and this also goes for another question that's just been asked, and it's worth putting out there. I mean, is this just about having a positive attitude and being positive all the time? Melissa, maybe you want to weigh in on this. Is it just about having a positive attitude and trying to be as positive as you can?
No, because that's not genuine and it's not sustainable. So, you know, it's an interesting one in terms of, I grew up, my father used to always say to me, you know, you just need to think positively. That was my childhood line, was you just need to think positively. And, you know, it doesn't work. It's not sustainable. So as I was saying before, you know, we ride the roller coaster of life. There's ups and downs. So, you know, it is also worth saying, though, Chris, you know, the glass half full, glass half empty. You know, people are naturally more inclined to one way or the other. You know, our personalities kind of predispose us to see the world in that way. So it's important to recognise kind of who you are as a person and your natural tendencies. I'm an extremely optimistic person. I actually think the glass is full most of the time, which causes more challenges sometimes in terms of being a little bit deluded. But, you know, I see the world very positively and I have a very positive attitude. Other people don't. And so it's good to just appreciate that and understand that we're all different around that. But certainly thinking to yourself each morning, I'm going to think positively, we know that that's just not going to be sustainable. So it's, as I say, it's really around acceptance. It's appreciating that you're going to have those positive and negative emotions, and thinking about the research suggesting that, you know, you're working towards that ratio of 3 to 1.
Yeah, and Chris, can I just add in something on top of what Melissa's just really clearly articulated, just by way of example? So I kind of went through a period where I really got into positive psychology and I wanted to use it all the time. So my kids would be having a meltdown over something, and I used to think that it would be really valuable to try to help them see things in a different way, a positive way. So whatever the meltdown was about, it's like, but what's good about this situation? Why don't we have a look for the positives in this? And it is the number one worst thing you can do with anybody who has gone into what I'm sure we'll cover in another session, the amygdala hijack of, I'm gone, I'm in my negative, and here you are trying to ram your positivity down my throat. It is possibly the worst strategy ever. And I think, as Melissa has so clearly articulated and Simon touched on before, negative emotions are a part of who we are. and allowing people to feel that negativity when they're in that space is okay. Probably don't try and tackle it for them in that moment, but leave the space, and at another time think about strategies to bring more positive in to help them, rather than trying to do it all in one interaction.
Simon Moss, what about you? Final thoughts. Is this all about having a positive attitude and just simply being positive all the time? What do you think?
Well, I definitely agree with all the comments that have been made, and I particularly agree with the notion that if someone's sort of struggling a lot, the first moment really should be just empathising and validating and understanding and think, rather than trying to dismiss, right? Because the natural response is often, don't worry about it. And it's funny that when anyone learns counselling or psychology, that's one of the first things they learn, right? Empathy and validating, rather than trying to dismiss people's negative emotions. And when you read it and you learn it for the first time, you think, well, that's obvious. Of course you should do that. Of course you should empathise. But it's funny that it's just in natural life, it's so natural not to do that. It's so natural just to try to push away something negative, just because it doesn't feel right. And being able to sit with that is actually something that takes a lot of practice, actually. And it takes practice in yourself to know what it's like to really just sit with and experience someone being negative for a moment. Because as you say, once they can vent some of those concerns for a while, then they're happy to think about what they could gain, the meaning of this event, what they've learned, and that sort of thing. But certainly not initially. Yeah.
Thank you, Associate Professor Simon Moss, who's coming to us from Charles Darwin University in Darwin. Gabrielle Harris, Founder and Managing Director of Interchange, and Dr. Melissa Giles, who's our Consulting Director at Interchange as well. Please give them a big round of applause. Hooray! It's been fantastic to talk to you guys today. Thank you so much. We are almost out of time. That entire hour has gone so fast. I am hoping we're going to throw to our musical act. We have a house band every week here on the 2 p.m. project. I almost forgot the name of the show then. That's how committed I am to thinking about what everyone's talking about. I'm very pleased. I'm hoping to introduce Nadav Rehman. If you want to find more of Nadav's work, he can be found on Instagram, the signal to noise ratio. That's all one word. Nadav's been composing music for over 20 years, originally working in music for theatre and electronic music under the name White Noise Carousel, and he more recently was performing as a keys player for live hip-hop band Royalty Noise and live R&B act Zretro. So it's retro with a Z in front of it. Nadav Rehman, are you there? Can we bring you in? Pronto?
Hi.
Nadav, you're there.
For having
yes,
me on
hello.
the show.
Can you
okay?
hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Fantastic. I don't know whether we can see. Oh, you're coming in strong. Oh, there you are. Hello, my friend. Thank you so much for your time today. It's a great pleasure to have you here. So tell us a little bit about what you're about to play and why you've chosen this song.
Sure. Thanks for asking me to play. I don't usually play solo, as Chris introduced. I'm originally a composer, and in the last 5 or 6 years started playing live music more often, and I usually play with bands. I enjoy collaborating. Collaborating has been a really interesting experience for musicians in the last couple of weeks, because everyone's sending each other files a lot more, which it's good that a lot of people have bedroom studios these days. So I was just thinking about what would be an appropriate song to play for today. And I thought I'd play a song that had some personal meaning to me, and also I think is something that it's just kind of a nice song in the current climate. And it's a song by George Gershwin called Someone to Watch Over Me, which is probably what a lot of people feel like they want right now. It was actually, Gershwin was one of my piano mentors' favorite composers. I was very fortunate to have a great jazz mentor in Melbourne called Alan Zavod for many years. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years ago, and I just, thinking about the experience he had, because he had a brain tumor that he lived with for about a year, kind of gives me a lot of reality around, being quarantined and, thinking of reflecting on, the experience he had being restricted, which was, quite, hard for him, and just getting a little taste of what that was like, but also putting it in perspective that, still have my health. And so, I thought that would be a nice ode to him. I'm not going to play it exactly. I don't actually know the song that well, so I probably won't play the verse. But and as I said, I haven't really rehearsed it, so it's going to be off the top of my head to some extent. So I'll see how we go.
That's fantastic,
Yeah.
Nadav. Thank you so much for joining us here today. You're going to play us out today. Just before we do, as a reminder, Nadav, you can find his music, The Signal to Noise Ratio. It's all one word on Instagram. Thank you to all our viewers here today. We are here every Friday at 2 p.m. Please join us. Watch out for the link on Instagram. We'll be posting more about the show next week. As a reminder, we are creating these shows customized for individual businesses. So if this suits your needs for your people at home, we can create exactly what you need through a brilliantly conceived television show starring all of us and special guests. And a house band, which takes me back to you, Nadav. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Chris Gabbardi is my name. I'll catch you next week. Nadav, over to you.
All right. Thank you, guys.